He was just a broken soldier, trying to survive another winter with his loyal dog. But when fate uncovered the truth his father died to protect, he found more than secrets beneath the mountain. He found faith, because sometimes God doesn't stop the storm. He gives you the strength to walk through it. If you believe miracles still
Go
exist,
to the mountaintop,
hit that subscribe,
and look again.
like, and share this story of hope. You never know whose heart it might heal. The wind rolled down the Oregon mountains like a living thing, cold and endless, sweeping across the pines that stood like dark sentinels. Snow came in thin, ghostly veils, whispering against the wooden cabin perched on the edge of a frozen ridge. David Harris tightened his grip on the steering wheel of the old Ford pickup as it groaned up the final incline. The headlights cut through the flurries, illuminating the skeletal branches that clawed at the sky. He was 47 now, his face lined, his eyes carrying that familiar glassy fatigue of men who had seen too much and spoken too little. His once black hair had turned to dark ash, the kind that seemed permanently dusted with the memory of war. The short beard along his jaw was rough, streaked with gray, and his shoulders, still broad, carried the quiet weight of someone who no longer expected life to surprise him. Beside him, Max stirred, a large German shepherd with an amber gaze sharp enough to read a man's soul. The dog was 7 years old, strong, scarred, and silent. His left ear bore a notch from shrapnel in Kabul, a reminder of a night when both he and David should have died, but didn't. Max shifted, ears twitching at the sound of the wind, as if the storm outside was another battle to prepare for. The truck's heater barely worked, and the cab smelled faintly of wet fur and burnt coffee. David rubbed his thumb across the steering wheel, his calloused hand trembling slightly, not from cold, but from memory. There had been too many goodbyes in his life. His wife's quiet departure when she couldn't bear the nightmares anymore, his mother's death 3 winters ago, and the brothers he buried in foreign soil. When the cabin came into view, half buried under snow, David exhaled a sound that was part relief, part dread. The roof sagged slightly, and the old chimney leaned like a tired soldier refusing to fall. The place had been his mother's refuge, and after her passing, he hadn't returned, until now. Maybe because there was nowhere else left to go. He killed the engine, and silence fell heavy as snowfall. For a long minute, neither man nor dog moved. Max stared through the windshield, tail still, body tense. David finally reached for the door handle. "We're home, buddy," he murmured. His voice was low, gravelly, carrying the weight of both statement and question. Snow crunched beneath his boots as he stepped out. The wind cut through his worn jacket, the same military coat he'd carried since his last deployment. He made his way to the porch, where the wood creaked underfoot like it remembered him. The key his mother had hidden under the third plank was still there, rusted but loyal. When the door opened, the cabin exhaled the stale breath of years gone by. Dust floated through the air like forgotten spirits. The air smelled of pine and smoke and something faintly sweet, lavender, his mother's favorite scent. Max entered first, nose to the Seoul ground, moving with the cautious grace of a soldier clearing a room. His claws tapped softly on the floorboards, ears pivoting toward every sound. David stood in the doorway for a long time, letting the silence settle around him. The old rocking chair by the window still faced the forest. A knitted blanket was draped over its arm, and the small table beside it still held a cold, empty teacup. For a second, he could almost hear her voice again, gentle, tired, always humming some old gospel tune. He ran his hand across the back of the chair, and the emotion hit him like recoil. He had spent years learning how to silence fear, anger, and grief, but the sight of that chair undid him more efficiently than any battlefield ever had. He turned away, jaw tightening. "Let's get a fire going," he muttered. He set down his duffel and crouched by the hearth, stacking the old logs still neatly piled in the corner. His hands were steady now, moving with purpose. Max lay down beside him, resting his head on his paws, but his eyes never stopped scanning the room. The fire crackled to life, painting the cabin in a flicker of gold and amber. For the first time since he'd arrived, warmth began to creep back into the space. David dropped into the old armchair, exhaling deeply. His gaze wandered over the walls lined with family photographs. His parents on their wedding day, a younger version of himself in uniform, his mother beside him, and one faded picture of a man he barely remembered, his father, Robert Harris. Robert had been tall, wiry, with the same blue-gray eyes David saw in the mirror. A mechanic by trade, a soldier by service, and a mystery by every measure. One winter, he'd gone into the forest to work on a government project and never came back. The sheriff called it an accident. His mother called it classified. David had been 10 years old then. He stared at that photograph now, feeling that same ache stir again. "You left us without a word," he whispered, "and she spent the rest of her life waiting." Max's ears twitched, his gaze snapping toward the floorboards near the old stove. A low growl rumbled from his chest. David frowned. "What is it?" he asked quietly, reaching for his flashlight. Max stood, muscles taut, sniffing along a seam in the floor. The dog began to paw lightly, the boards thudding hollow beneath his claws. David crouched beside him. The flashlight's beam slid over the wooden planks, revealing a faint line where the boards had been pried up before. "You smell something?" he murmured. Max whined once. Confirmation. With a grunt, David reached for a screwdriver from his pack and wedged it beneath the board. The wood groaned before giving way with a dry crack. Beneath it lay a small, dust-covered metal box, army green, edges rusted. David brushed off the dirt and saw letters etched faintly across the lid. R. Harris. He froze, breath clouding in the cold air. His father's name. Inside the box, wrapped in brittle paper, was a folded note and something heavier. He unfolded the note carefully. The handwriting was his father's. Strong, deliberate strokes, though time had faded the ink. "If you found this, it means you finally came home. There are things buried deeper than roots in these hills. If anyone comes asking about the land, don't trust them. Some truths are meant to rest." Beneath the letter lay a small compass, its glass cracked, but the needle still moving. David turned it over. On the back was a set of coordinates scratched into the metal. The air in the cabin seemed to tighten. "What the hell were you into, old man?" he whispered. Max whined softly as if echoing the unease. David set the compass down and stared into the fire, the orange light reflecting in his eyes. A storm howled outside, pressing against the walls, but it was the storm inside him that roared louder. He thought about leaving, packing up, driving away before curiosity turned to obsession. But deep down, he knew he wouldn't. The soldier in him couldn't walk away from a mystery with his family's name on it. He leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. The fire popped, and shadows danced across the ceiling like restless ghosts. "Guess we're not done fighting after all," he murmured to Max. The dog wagged his tail once, the faintest motion of agreement. Outside, the snow thickened, swallowing the world in white silence. Inside, under the flicker of firelight, David Harris, once staff sergeant, now a man haunted by both war and blood, sat with a letter from a ghost and a question that had waited 30 years for an answer. Tomorrow, he told himself, he would follow those coordinates, but tonight he simply sat, listening to the wind whisper through the cracks in the walls, the old house breathing around him, and the sound of Max's steady breathing anchoring him to the present. For the first time in years, he didn't feel alone, just uncertain. And somehow, that was enough. The morning after the storm came clear, but bitterly cold. The mountains looked clean again, washed by the snow, but David Harris knew better. He had seen landscapes look innocent after battle, only to find the smoke still rising under the ash. He stared at the small compass in his hand, tracing the numbers on the back until they were etched into memory. Max sat beside him on the porch, eyes alert, tail still. When David finally spoke, his voice was steady. "Let's go see what he left behind." They set out before sunrise, David wearing his faded green jacket and a scarf that had once belonged to his mother. The forest stretched before them, dense pine, silver birch, and quiet valleys where fog clung to the earth like breath. Max trotted ahead, his paws silent on the crusted snow, occasionally stopping to sniff at the wind. Every few steps, he looked back, waiting for David's nod before moving on. By mid-morning, they reached a narrow trail half swallowed by fallen branches. A rusted sign leaned sideways, its letters nearly erased by time. U.S. property, restricted area. David's gut tightened. He hadn't seen that symbol since his service days. The military had a way of never letting go of its ghosts. They followed the trail deeper until the trees thinned, revealing a small clearing surrounded by jagged rock. In the center was a concrete hatch, almost invisible under snow and moss. The faint outline of a faded insignia, an eagle clutching a triangle, was carved into the slab. Below it, letters almost worn smooth, Project Aurora. David knelt, brushing off the snow with a gloved hand. The hinges were rusted, the padlock corroded but not broken. He tried the handle. It resisted at first, then groaned open with a metallic scream. A breath of cold, stale air rose from below, carrying the smell of oil, dust, and something faintly metallic, like blood. He shined his flashlight into the darkness, catching the glint of steel walls descending by ladder. Max barked once, tail raised but uncertain. "Easy, boy," David said softly, lowering himself down the rungs. The air grew colder with every step until his breath came in fog. The beam of his light swept across the underground room. Crates, filing cabinets, and old lab tables scattered beneath a ceiling of pipes. The first thing he noticed was the silence. The kind that wasn't just absence of sound, but the presence of something waiting. On one wall hung a row of photographs pinned under glass. He wiped away the dust, and the images came into focus. Men in uniforms standing beside large cylindrical machines. One of them stopped him cold. The man at the center, smiling faintly, hand resting on a clipboard, was Robert Harris, his father. For a moment, David couldn't breathe. His father looked younger, confident, eyes bright with purpose. Not the ghost he remembered, but a man alive, proud of something he believed in. He leaned closer and saw the name tags. Dr. Matthew Crane, Linton Robert Harris, Capt. Nolan Briggs. A sound broke the silence, a faint hum, mechanical, buried somewhere behind the far wall. David turned, following it to a control panel covered in cobwebs. He brushed off the dust and saw a red switch labeled Generator Bypass. Against better judgment, he flipped it. The lights flickered to life with a low rumble, illuminating the room in sickly yellow glow. Rows of metal containers lined the wall, each labeled Biotesting Unit 1976-1978. Inside one, through cracked glass, he saw the outline of a human form, nothing more than bones wrapped in what looked like silver mesh. He stumbled back, heart pounding. Max growled, stepping between David and the container. Then he noticed a desk pushed into a corner, papers strewn across it. He picked up a logbook, dated December 17th, 1978. His father's handwriting again. Aurora entering Phase 3. Human resonance pattern stable. Command insists on weaponization. I disagree. If they continue, I'll bury it myself. David's fingers trembled as he read. His father hadn't vanished. He'd gone to hide something, to protect it, or destroy it. He flipped to the last page, but the ink ended mid-sentence, smeared as if by a shaking hand. The sound of gravel crunching outside froze him. He turned off the light and motioned to Max. The dog's ears pricked, body tense. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, above the hatch. Through the thin shaft of daylight, a shadow passed. Someone was up there. David's pulse hammered. He moved silently, closing the notebook and slipping it into his jacket. Another sound, a man's voice, faint but clear. Perimeter looks cold. Keep it that way. The voice was deep, measured, belonging to someone used to command. Boots scraped on concrete, and then silence again. He waited, breath shallow, counting seconds. When no further sound came, he climbed the ladder slowly, Max behind him. The hatch was half closed now, snow drifting across it. David pushed it open just enough to see the forest. Nothing but white and trees, until he caught sight of a black SUV parked at the tree line. He froze. The vehicle was too clean for this place, too new. A man stood beside it, scanning the woods through binoculars. He wore a long brown coat and black gloves, his face sharp, angular, framed by dark hair neatly combed back. Even from a distance, David could tell he wasn't a hiker or hunter. This was Raymond Blake, though David didn't know his name yet, a corporate investigator in his late 40s, once a government analyst before being quietly dismissed for exposing budget fraud. His arrogance was quiet but palpable, his expression one of controlled superiority. He looked like a man who had traded conscience for clarity. David ducked back, pulling the hatch shut. His heart pounded as the SUV engine started and rolled away slowly. Whoever they were, they knew someone had been here. He knelt beside Max, whispering, We're not alone out here. Max pressed his nose to David's palm, eyes steady, unafraid. The gesture grounded him. For all the ghosts in his past, at least one soul still believed in him. As they began the trek home, the forest no longer looked peaceful. Every tree felt like a watcher, every echo a warning. The compass in David's pocket seemed to hum faintly, as if reacting to something unseen. He didn't yet understand the depth of what his father had tried to bury, but he knew one thing. Whatever Project Aurora was, it hadn't died with Robert Harris. The next morning came gray and brittle, the kind of winter light that couldn't decide whether to stay or fade. The forest still clung to the fog like a veil. David Harris stood outside the cabin, an old mug of coffee steaming between his hands, staring at the snow-covered trees where the black SUV had vanished the day before. His mind kept replaying the moment, the faint crunch of boots above the hatch, the voice giving orders, the sharp sense of being hunted. Max sat at his feet, tail flicking once, gaze fixed on the same direction. When the crunch of tires reached his ears again, David's muscles tightened. A dark sedan approached along the narrow road, too polished to belong here. It stopped a few yards from the cabin, and out stepped the man he had seen near the clearing, Raymond Blake. Up close, the man's coldness was more deliberate than David expected. He was tall, lean, dressed in a long wool coat over a navy suit that somehow stayed spotless despite the mud. His dark hair was combed back neatly, and a faint scar curved under his right eye, a mark that gave him a look both human and predatory. His eyes were steel gray, sharp but empty, like someone who had practiced empathy and abandoned it. "Mr. Harris," Blake said, his voice calm, even pleasant as he approached. "Sorry to intrude. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." David didn't answer. He just took a sip of his coffee and watched the man step closer. Max growled low, the kind of sound that made the air itself pause. Blake glanced down at the dog, then back up, smiling faintly. "Beautiful animal. Military, I assume?" David's tone was flat. "He doesn't like strangers." Blake nodded slowly, slipping his gloved hands into his coat pockets. "Understandable. I'd be wary too if I lived up here alone. You've got quite a piece of land, Mr. Harris. Remote, quiet, must feel free." David's eyes narrowed. "What do you want?" Blake's smile widened a fraction. "Let's just say I represent a development company, Aurora Energy Holdings. We're working with the government to reclaim decommissioned military zones for renewable energy research. Your property happens to sit on one such site. We're prepared to offer you a generous sum for it." David tilted his head, studying him. "You did your homework." "I like to be thorough," Blake replied, stepping closer until they were just a few feet apart. "You'll find the offer fair, more than fair. You'd be doing the country a service by letting that land be put to better use." David chuckled, a sound without humor. "You mean by letting you bury something under it again?" For the first time, Blake's expression cracked. "I'm not sure what you mean." "Yes, you are." David's voice dropped. "I know what's under there. My father worked on it. And whatever Aurora was, it wasn't about clean energy." Blake studied him for a long moment, then sighed, as if disappointed. "You're not like your father. He was pragmatic." David's jaw clenched. "He died for what he believed in. You'd call that something else." The air between them thickened. Blake's smile returned, colder this time. "Think about the offer," he said, sliding an envelope onto the porch rail. "You'll find it hard to refuse once the weather gets worse." He turned toward his car. Max barked once, sharp, warning. Blake paused and glanced back. For a second, his gaze softened, almost pitying. "Careful what you dig up, Mr. Harris. Some things were buried for a reason." When the car finally disappeared, David ripped open the envelope. Inside was a typed contract and a check with more zeros than he'd seen in years. He crumpled it and threw it into the fire. That night, the wind returned, howling against the walls. David couldn't sleep. Every shadow outside seemed to move. Around midnight, Max lifted his head and gave a low growl. David sat up instantly, reaching for his pistol. The sound came again. Footsteps on snow. He moved to the window, peering through the frost. Two figures, black silhouettes against white ground, creeping toward the back of the cabin. They weren't hunters. Too quiet. Too deliberate. "Stay close," he whispered. Max's ears flattened as they slipped into the hallway. The door exploded inward a second later, the frame splintering. A man in a balaclava entered first, rifle raised, followed by another carrying a flashlight. David fired once, hitting the first man's shoulder. Max lunged, slamming into the second, dragging him down in a flurry of snarls and snow. "Go!" David shouted, grabbing his jacket and the notebook he'd taken from the bunker. He kicked open the back door, and they fled into the storm. Bullets cracked through the air, slicing into trees, but the night swallowed them fast. They ran until the cabin was a faint shadow behind them. The cold burned his lungs, but he didn't stop until he reached a clearing he recognized. A small, half-collapsed wooden building at the edge of the forest. His mother's old field station. He forced the door open. Inside smelled of dust, antiseptic, and faint lavender. The ghost of her. Shelves of medical jars lined the walls, and an old cot sat in the corner. David sank to his knees, breath heavy, while Max stood guard at the window. When he lifted his head, he noticed an object on the shelf, a small tape recorder, half buried under cloth. The label, written in his mother's cursive, read for David. His throat tightened as he pressed play. Her voice filled the room, soft and trembling. "Contrai, no conningete giu nai, nghia la conjantim gen suthat. Chakon hong fai ke fan boy. Ong ai kobao ve thuma, ho kong nen taora. Heitin vao conjuong ong ai jan shon." David closed his eyes. The storm outside faded beneath the sound of her voice. The weight of years, of grief and guilt, settled on him. But beneath it grew something else. Resolve. When the tape clicked to an end, he stood. "They want war," he murmured, "but they'll get the truth instead." Max barked softly, tail wagging once. David placed a hand on the dog's head. "We'll finish what he started, boy, whatever it takes." Outside, the snowstorm raged again, but inside that broken cabin, the fire of purpose had finally returned to David Harris's eyes. Dawn came dim and colorless. Snow still covered the forest in an endless white shroud, and the silence carried an almost sacred weight. David Harris stood at the threshold of the old medical cabin, fastening the strap of his pack. His shoulder ached from the scuffle the night before, a dull burn under the bandage he'd tied himself. Max nudged his leg, ears pricked forward, amber eyes bright with alertness. "Yeah, I know," David muttered. "We're going back." The decision wasn't easy. Every instinct told him to move in the opposite direction, away from the mountain and the men hunting him. But the words on that old tape recorder wouldn't let him go. "If you found the truth, protect it." His mother's voice had cut deeper than any bullet. By mid-morning, the trail to the bunker was half hidden beneath fresh snow. The trees loomed higher now, their black trunks streaked with frost. David's boots crunched rhythmically, while Max moved silently ahead, pausing often to scan the tree line. At one point, a raven burst from a branch overhead, startling them both. David couldn't shake the feeling they weren't alone. When they reached the old hatch, the padlock had been replaced, new, heavy, and industrial. David crouched beside it, exhaling slowly. He reached into his pack for a crowbar and a compact cutting torch he'd salvaged years ago. The hiss of flame filled the cold air, and within minutes, the lock snapped clean. He pushed the hatch open, descending into the darkness once more. The bunker smelled the same, metal, decay, and dust. But now something faint buzzed below, like the hum of buried power. The flashlight's beam caught the words he hadn't noticed before, faintly engraved into the far wall. Project Aurora, Classified Unit 02. He and Max moved deeper, past the old lab, and into a corridor that sloped downward. A heavy door stood at the end, marked Authorized Personnel Only. It was welded shut, but corrosion had eaten through parts of the seam. He wedged the crowbar in and heaved until metal shrieked and gave way. Behind it was a second chamber, larger, colder. The walls glowed faintly with pale blue light emanating from glass tubes that lined the room. Inside them, strange metallic veins pulsed gently, like living circuitry. In the center stood a server array, its interface still humming with residual power. A monitor flickered on as he approached. For a heartbeat, the screen was static. Then an image formed. It was Robert Harris, his father. The man's face was older than the photos, bearded, eyes weary, voice trembling with conviction. "If you're seeing this, David, then it means I failed to stop them. Aurora was never meant to be a weapon. It was designed to harness human bioelectricity to sustain life, not destroy it. But the higher-ups wanted soldiers who could fight beyond exhaustion, men who would never die. When I realized what they intended, I sealed the system. They came for me that night. Your mother knew. She helped hide the evidence. If they ever come back, son, don't let them reopen it. Destroy everything before they do. The screen flickered again, showing his father leaning closer, eyes filled with something between fear and love. You were just a boy when I left. I wish I'd told you more. But if you're here, it's your turn to finish what I couldn't. Remember, this power belongs to life, not death. Then the feed cut out. David stood frozen. All the years of anger, of wondering why his father had vanished, dissolved into something else, understanding, grief, and the burden of legacy. He looked around the room again, realizing what Aurora truly was, a miracle that men had tried to turn into a monster. Max barked suddenly, sharp and urgent. The sound echoed through the chamber. David's instincts kicked in. He turned off the flashlight and crouched behind one of the consoles. Seconds later, footsteps echoed down the corridor, heavy, deliberate, and many. Voices followed. Fan out, he's down here somewhere. The first man through the door was tall, muscular, his face hidden by a black tactical mask. He carried an assault rifle and moved with practiced precision. Behind him came three more, weapons raised, and then, stepping into the light, Raymond Blake. He no longer wore his clean suit and polite smile. Dressed in dark combat gear, he looked leaner, harder, his hair slick with melting snow. The scar under his eye caught the light like a blade. I warned you, Harris, he said, voice calm but cold. You shouldn't have come back here. David rose slowly from behind the console, pistol in hand. You should have left it buried. Blake's eyes narrowed. You think you're protecting something sacred? You're not. Aurora is the future. Your father wasted his life trying to kill it. Don't make the same mistake. Funny, David said. That's exactly what murderers tell themselves before pulling the trigger. The tension snapped. One of Blake's men fired first. David dove behind a pillar, returning fire. Bullets ricocheted, sparks flying. Max charged, slamming into a soldier's legs, sending him sprawling. The second turned, shouting, but David's shot took him clean through the arm. Blake shouted, Hold fire! Don't hit the core! His men hesitated, unsure. David seized the moment, scrambling to the control panel. His father's last words echoed in his head. Destroy everything. He slammed the override switch and twisted a rusted valve. Alarms blared instantly. The monitors flashed red. Core instability. 60 seconds to critical. Blake lunged forward, grabbing David's arm, the two of them grappling violently. The older man was strong, but desperation lent David new strength. He threw Blake back into a console, sparks bursting around them. You're going to kill us all, Blake roared. Not all, David hissed. Just the ones who can't let go. He turned to Max. Out, now! The dog bolted toward the exit. David followed, limping, shoulder bleeding from a grazing shot. Behind them, the hum rose into a scream. The corridor trembled as lights exploded one by one. They burst through the hatch just as a blinding flash swallowed the mountain. A thunderous roar followed, heat rippling against the snow. David and Max were thrown to the ground, rolling across the frozen earth as fire shot through the trees. When the world finally fell silent, David lifted his head. The entrance to the bunker was gone, buried beneath a mound of burning debris. Max limped toward him, pressing his head against David's chest. He wrapped an arm around the dog and stared at the rising plume of smoke, the mountain glowing faintly beneath dawn's first light. It's done, he whispered. But deep inside, he knew nothing that powerful ever truly stayed dead. Spring arrived hesitantly in the Oregon mountains, soft and reluctant after the violence of winter. Patches of snow still clung to the shadows of the pines, but the rivers had begun to move again, thawing under pale sunlight. The air smelled different now, damp soil, pine sap, and the faint promise of green. David Harris stood at the edge of the clearing, where the old bunker once lay. The explosion weeks ago had reshaped the mountainside. Blackened earth now hid what had been Project Aurora. He could still see the twisted remains of steel buried beneath the mud, half swallowed by nature's quiet vengeance. He breathed in deeply, letting the cold air clear the fog from his mind. Behind him, Max trotted through the grass, his limp almost gone. The German shepherd had healed well, stitches out, fur grown back over the scar on his flank. His coat shone again, black and tan under the morning sun. He was calmer now, but his eyes never stopped watching, the soldier's instinct unbroken. A government vehicle was parked nearby, and from it stepped Agent Claire Donovan, a woman in her late 30s. She was tall, fit, and carried herself with the precise confidence of someone used to command. Her hair, a sharp chestnut bob, framed a face that might have been stern, if not for the warmth in her gray-blue eyes. She wore a dark field jacket with a Department of Historical Preservation insignia stitched to the sleeve. "Mr. Harris," she greeted, walking toward him across the uneven ground. Her tone was formal, but not unfriendly. "We've concluded our initial survey. The site's officially sealed. The Department of Defense signed over jurisdiction yesterday." David turned to face her, squinting against the sun. "So it's done?" "It's protected," she corrected gently. "Your father's work, what's left of it, will be archived as part of classified military history. Nothing from here will be used again." He nodded, silent for a moment. "Good. That's what he wanted." Claire studied him for a heartbeat, then offered a faint smile. "You could have sold this land and disappeared. Most men would have, but you stayed. Why?" David glanced at Max, who sat nearby, tail flicking lazily in the dirt. "Because running never fixed anything. Not for him, not for me." Her expression softened. "If it helps, your father's file is being reviewed for reinstatement. His record will be cleared, posthumously." For a moment, David couldn't find words. He just nodded, eyes lowered. "He'd have liked that," he said quietly. "Took 40 years, but I guess it's better late than never." Claire slipped her hands into her coat pockets. "You've got courage, Mr. Harris. Most people wouldn't have gone back into that place." He gave a dry laugh. "Most people didn't have a dog like Max." At his name, Max perked up, trotting toward Claire. She crouched, smiling as she scratched behind his ears. "He's beautiful," she said softly. "Smart eyes. How old?" 7, David replied. "He's earned every gray hair he's got." Claire stood, brushing snow from her knees. "If you ever consider helping us with search and rescue operations, we could use someone like you. And him." "Thanks," David said, shaking her hand. "But I think we'll stay put for now." When she left, the clearing felt lighter somehow, as if the ghosts had finally gone. David watched the SUV disappear down the dirt road until it was just a shimmer of dust and sunlight. Then he turned back toward the cabin. The house had changed. The old boards had been replaced, the windows cleaned, the roof reinforced. A new wooden sign hung by the porch, hand-carved with steady letters. Aurora Haven, Rescue and Rehabilitation Center. Inside, the faint scent of fresh paint mixed with pine oil and coffee. The living room had been transformed into an open space filled with crates, tools, and dog beds. On one wall hung photos, his mother smiling in her garden, his father in uniform, and a few new ones of rescued dogs with their owners. A young volunteer, Lucas Miller, worked near the back, repairing a kennel door. Lucas was 26, tall but lean, with sun-browned skin and kind brown eyes. He had a faint stutter when he spoke, the result of a head injury from his time overseas, but his patience and empathy made him good with animals. "Morning, Mr. Harris," he greeted, standing straight. "Morning, Lucas. How's the new one settling in?" Lucas nodded toward a small crate where a nervous Labrador mix peeked out. "Scared, but eating. That's a start." David smiled. "Good. That's all anyone needs, a place to start." He carried 2 mugs of coffee to the porch, setting one on the step beside him. Max climbed up and settled next to his chair, head resting against his leg. The sun had begun to dip, staining the sky in soft gold and pink. Birds moved between branches, and somewhere down the valley he could hear laughter. One of the volunteers finishing chores near the stable. He looked across the lake, its surface catching the sunset like molten glass. The reflection shimmered, and for an instant, he thought he saw movement. His mother's silhouette, faint and smiling. Her voice drifted through memory, gentle and warm. "You did right, David." He let the quiet settle. The war inside him had gone still. For the first time in years, the air didn't feel heavy, and the house didn't echo with ghosts. It breathed again, alive with purpose. David took a sip of coffee and leaned back. "We made it, buddy," he murmured. Max thumped his tail once, eyes half closed in peace. As twilight spread across the mountains, the last light of the day reflected on the sign of Aurora Haven, casting a soft glow that seemed to linger long after the sun was gone, like a promise that even the deepest scars could turn to light. Sometimes God doesn't calm the storm. He calms his child, while the storm still rages. David's story reminds us that even in our darkest nights, there is always a spark of grace waiting to rise. Miracles don't always come with thunder or angels. Sometimes they come through loyalty, through love, or through the quiet breath of a faithful dog lying beside us. If you've ever felt lost, broken, or forgotten, remember this. God still works in silence. He turns pain into purpose and ruins into refuge. Just like David rebuilt his life with faith and love, maybe today is your day to start again, to forgive, to rebuild, and to believe that peace can bloom after war. If this story touched your heart, don't keep it to yourself. Share it. Comment your thoughts below. Subscribe for more stories of hope, redemption, and the quiet miracles God still performs every day. And may the Lord bless and protect everyone watching. You are never alone.